Good morning or good day. One of the most difficult questions that I receive is why does God allow suffering? In other words, why does God give babies cancer? And the quick answer is God doesn't. Um, it's like the saying good times create weak men create bad times create strong men create good times. It's easy to find joy in life when things go according to plan. Finding the joy in life when you're dealing with issues like an illness, how to understand, accept, and get family and friends on board with your shrinking influence in life uh, basically become paramount in your life. In my case, it's a chronic illness. It happens to be, in my case, inflammatory disease of the peripheral nervous system. It's also known as autoimmune disease or peripheral nervous system disorders. It's of the peripheral nervous system. Mine includes diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, colitis, diabetic neuropathy, just to name a few. There's also a central nervous system disorders, uh, in addition to what I have, the peripheral. You'll find muscular sclerosis in the central nervous system list of ailments. Um, Basically, well, medical science has made incredible strides in developing effective treatments for the damaging effects of my disease on my body. I still face a staggering list of challenges to my mental and emotional well-being. Um, what's happening is medical science is keeping many of us here well beyond our expiry date, and the system isn't the social network is not in place to put up with us, for lack of a better term. We're kind of like the living dead. We can't work, we can't do anything, and we're kind of outcasts. But nobody wants to look at us, nobody wants to see us, everybody abandons us. It sounds a little dramatic, but it's basically the gist of it all. It usually happens to people, these chronic illnesses or lingering deaths, when you don't expect it. Something bad happens that um, forces people to deal with their health crisis. Usually, when these things happen, people immediately start asking the question, where is God? This is one of the most disheartening symptoms of being human. To only seek God when your need is desperate, when all other avenues have led to dead ends. And then also to find out that, where's God? Does God exist? Why doesn't He answer my prayers? God is all loving despite our disappointment in His handling of our crisis. We live in a death culture, let's be honest, where evil and suffering are often at the forefront of our minds, looking forward to rewards after we die, life in heaven. Particularly when we're suffering, we start looking for something better, and it's not going to be here. Let's hope it's over there. So, how could a good God allow such pain? Why doesn't He do something to help us? Why doesn't God rid the world of all suffering? These are important questions, and we will not solve them in one vlog. But I'll do my best to address some of the issues, some of the pain and suffering that people are going through, and begin to offer some possible solutions or explanations of these ongoing dilemmas. Everybody eventually goes through it. How to live, Or, in other words, self manage these chronic disease that leaves us lingering towards death. Um, like I said earlier, with medical technology getting so incredibly good, uh, but at the same time leaving only treatments and no cures for many illnesses. Uh, Somebody with a chronic lingering death like this is at the mercy of our socialized medical system that routinely drops coverage of vital treatments or forces us to accept inferior generic drugs in order to save money, while wasting money. For instance, the same, wasting money like paying the CEO of Hydro Ontario $6 million salary. Doesn't make sense. The biggest fear with chronic illness is the uncertainty of access associated with these expensive treatments. While every day, in my case, my condition slowly worsens, it's got these sporadic bouncing around illnesses in my body. It's like I got 6 or 7 inflammatory illnesses that flare up with symptoms lasting a few days, several months, debilitating pain, and all with the knowledge that at any moment a flare up could become permanent. Chronic progressive illness has forced me to face many stressful lifestyle changes, including giving up activities that I enjoyed, forcing me to adapt to things like hiring others to do things that I enjoy doing myself. The need to develop emotional endurance becomes one of the most paramount uh, thing to manage as my normal day-to-day tasks become too difficult to accomplish. Um, it can become depressing. Over time, these stressful factors build up and develop into negative, toxic feelings that rob me and other people suffering like me uh, from the emotional energy that would be otherwise used to help our healing process. So, because depression often leads to poor eating habits, lack of exercise, inconsistent hygiene, um, it can complicate a person's recovery. It can worsen their overall physical condition, and in the end, it leaves them withdrawing from society. For all of the 1-800 suicide hotline postings, people, they don't give a shit. As long as a person stays quiet and nobody really knows, nobody doesn't have to deal with it, these people, these chronically ill with progressive disease, um, find themselves abandoned and forgotten. One of the biggest issues is that these worsening diseases affects one's self-management. It explains how the disease forces a person out of social activities. For an example, it's it's interesting how, in unison, in my case, uh, all my friends, family, and caregivers started to judge my illness as me not caring enough to help myself. They forget that you get these things like, well, geez, if you just exercised for a couple hours per week, you'd feel so much better. But they don't even mention the fact that uh, these these suicide hotline advertisements on TV advertise with athletes who are training like 8 hours a day, and they're still having depressive, chronic, crippling issues. So, how does 2 hours per week work? It doesn't. It just makes people feel good by saying Oh, if you just exercised a little bit more, if you just did this a little bit more, if you just drank a little bit more water, oh, if you took this herbal tea, it would just make you feel so much better. Illness is illness. A broken bone is a broken bone. Colon that's disintegrating from bacteria or a virus or whatever is just what it is. People with chronic illness encounter all the issues that healthy people experience: financial issues, having to fix things around the home, employment, social drama on Facebook. And then on top of that, they've got to, in many cases, manage a multiple chronic progressive illness with many different systems to be managed. In my case, I must take needles, 4 or 5 needles a day to manage the diabetes. I must take 1 needle of chemotherapy to manage my crippling arthritis. And monthly, I must take another infused chemotherapy for my colon. All of these things are keeping everything uh, together. They're managing to keep me alive. Blood pressure pills, anti nausea medication. The list goes on and on and on. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in medication and treatments. The extent of everyday problems interfering with self managing these chronic illnesses depends on the very type of everyday problems that might be encountered on any particular day, as well as the type of treatment activity that might be scheduled for that day. Example, a chemotherapy at an infusion center. That means, as a patient of chronic illnesses, I must be extremely organized and focused if I wish to manage my chronic illness and everyday problems successfully. Something has to go then at one point. You become overwhelmed. Self management of a chronic illness by patients like myself um, are encouraged to self manage. Let's be honest, like Western society, socialized modern healthcare system um, sort of demands or is left on our shoulders that we must uh, provide for ourselves. We must manage our own health situation. In other words, we, the patient, must become an expert in our illness, and we must become an expert very quickly or suffer in silence. Self management requires people with chronic illness to monitor their health status, take medications as prescribed, interact with healthcare providers, manage impact of the illness on their physical, psychological, social interaction, all while getting themselves to these appointments, whether it's somebody else is driving them or they drive themselves. But this becomes a full-time job. So then you get to that point where I'm past my due date. I'm alive because the medical system has forced on me therapies that I may or may not have agreed with. And then they send you home to manage it all. And then they threaten you with cutting it off at some point in the future. It's like a cruel experience. There's this constant balancing of everyday life situations, and it's very, very stressful. Showing up for an infusion, waiting in line, um, trying to get home and throwing up in the parking lot at the local, you know. So you've got very chronically ill people, and to save money, the hospital has set up these places, infusion centers in shopping malls. There's the good side and the bad side. The good side is the parking is usually free at the shopping mall. The bad news is um, You're in a shopping mall. People are having a good time and they're shopping, they're spending money, and then you're trying to drag your ass into the shopping center, into the shopping mall where people are uh, have no idea that it's become kind of like a department of a branch of a hospital. And there you are, dragging your ass through there with your knapsack, with all your water and your snacks and everything, your computer, to prepare yourself for 3, 4, 5 hours of sitting in a chair while you're being infused. If you happen to be a person with chronic illness, you know that you have to manage work, you have to manage your family, you have to manage your friendships, and these you have to manage all your treatments, all your medical appointments. I'm not crying. I'm not whining about it. I'm just trying to get the message across that some of us with chronic illness actually stop and think, wait a second. Is it all worth it? I'm I'm causing an enormous amount of money on the system that's already taxed out. It's already it's already bankrupt. The medical system in Ontario, where I live, is bankrupt. It's like it's a nightmare when you find yourself in this kind of a situation. And every time you turn, they're using cheaper needles, or they can't afford the more expensive uh, infusion needles, and there's all kinds of things. Uh, the, the the blood work doesn't get done right, and then I got to race around trying to get my blood work done. I've had to become an expert in blood work, in lab work, um, because if I don't, the nurse doesn't take the proper amount of blood. They don't take it in the right vial. It's got to be a lavender. It's got to be this color. It's got to be that color. You got to learn all of these things, or nothing gets done, and nobody cares. There's just too many people in the system. There's too many, and we become a number. Eh, with privacy rules and everything else, I'm no longer a name, I'm a number, and I can't be an identifiable number. Nobody can know who I am. I'm like an anonymous person coming into a shopping mall and sitting in a chair, and everything has to be correct. And you sit there and you wonder, would it have been better just to have cancer and die, or be cured by the treatment? But the same treatment is being used on chronically ill people with autoimmune disorder, for instance, and it just prolongs our life. It just drags it out. And when I try to talk to people about it, I get this, oh, here's the 1-800 suicide hotline. It's got nothing to do with suicide. It's got to do with reality. And the reality is pain and suffering and wearing diapers and shitting yourself and throwing up in public all become normal. So I'm ending up my life uh, learning how not to be humiliated in humiliating experiences. There's nothing worse than shitting yourself in public, and that's all because of the medication. The medication keeps us alive, forces me to go out and get groceries, forces me to pay bills, it forces me to interact. Self management becomes neglected when people have these problems, these everyday problems. My financial, work related, as I said, marital, social problems. This is why it's difficult to even get on Facebook, get into an argument with somebody about something that doesn't matter. When you know when your whole life is revolving around where the nearest toilet is and can I use it, um, becomes the most paramount thing. The other things are nothing. Nothing. Being actively involved in my treatment, um, the regimes, the visiting healthcare providers, appointments, all the decision making that I must make on the at the moment, all the time. Um, so, is chronic illness a disability, or is it just slow death, a lingering death? The severity of physical limitations can only be assessed by the patient's own physical disability indicator. It's kind of like a self diagnostic rating system, basically distinguishing four levels, is what I use. No difficulties, mild difficulties, and moderate to severe. Whether this indicator rates the level of pain, discomfort, or mental attitude, it basically helps me uh, to perform different tasks and activities, such as the ability to walk for a short period of time, walking my dogs, uh, or just doing odd jobs around the house. It would be nice if I could just say that my disability indicator today is, you know, is moderate to severe or severe, and people understood that. But people don't understand that, and they don't want to understand that. The moment you say it's severe, I can't function, I'm just going to stay home, you start getting texts with the 1-800 suicide hotline again. Everyday problems that people with chronic illness encounter, whether having basic or social everyday problems added to their stress levels, ultimately impacting negatively on their need for independence, um, an independent type frame of mind, or the impact made when when we become dependent on others. That's been a real difficult issue too. Having problems, Facebook dramas. I've tried to get off of Facebook, but uh, there's a need to stay connected, and that's as bad as Facebook is, and as toxic as it is. It's become my only lifeline to others. I've done my best to stay connected, but people don't understand. They don't understand my frame of mind. They don't understand that in a moment's notice, I could have a problem, and I start talking strangely. I start acting peculiar, um, but nobody seems to understand this. They don't understand that what comes with chronic illness is strange behavior. If I had an alcoholic problem or a drug problem, if I was taking drugs, I was breaking into somebody's home and I was stealing things and pawning it, getting money, and then using illegal drugs, I would get more health care. I'd get more sympathy and more understanding from the system, from people in general. I wouldn't be getting the suicide hotline number and then left alone. I'd be getting some help. It's kind of like a social thing right now. It's the in thing is to help drug addicts, these addicted people. But God forbid that you give any time to people who are sick, because they've got it in their head that if I really did things like I said, drink herbal tea, exercise, all my problems would go away. Mine are self-inflicted. The drug addicts are not self-inflicted, but my illness is self-inflicted. My physical body attacking itself. I don't know how it happened, but my immune system is attacking myself, and um, that's something I can fix. It magically happens. Yeah, that's what people truly believe. So we sit in our chairs getting infused for 3, 4 hours, and we do talk. Some of us do talk, some don't. Some of us do. And I hear people say all the time, God damn it, I wish I had cancer. I either live or I either die. But this chronic infusions, I'm on infusion number 35. That's 35 rounds of chemo. And I take, I take chemotherapy for my arthritis once a week that keeps me walking and getting out of bed. And I'm told, well, that's a low dose because that's just a low dose. But if you multiply that, and it's cumulative, if you multiply that 1 week injection by 4 weeks, which is an infusion, it's no longer a low dose. It's now a normal dose of chemotherapy. Chemotherapy that makes me throw up. I even think about it and I throw up. But it's collateral damage because it helps me to walk. It helps me get up. It helps me go out to the grocery store. Helps me walk the dogs. But I admit I spent a lot of time thinking, what is the point? If they got rid of me at $200,000 in medical expenses a year, how many people could they help with other things like broken bones that can be healed and they can get back to society after a few months? I've become chronically disabled, but yet I can't be labeled disabled because I'm not disabled enough. You have to be so dependent on others before you can be labeled disabled. So the system has me going and coming different ways. I'm completely disabled, but I'm not disabled. I don't get any benefits as being disabled. I don't get any tax breaks. I don't get anything. And again, this is not to whine and cry. This is to let people understand the next time you say, oh, the 1-800 suicide hotline. So needless to say, unless you're independently wealthy and your friends and family are totally understanding of your ever worsening limitations being forced upon you by your illness, you and your self-management of your chronic illness will be severely impacted by any level of everyday problems and stress. The higher the person's rate of general health, the less likely it is that they will encounter problems in their everyday life. In short, due to stress, the stress levels will be manageable. However, when given long-term exposure to stress, it dramatically reduces a person's ability to bounce back. I've lost my ability to bounce back. When I go down, I go down. Chronically ill persons who experience mild, moderate to severe physical limitations have a significantly higher risk of having everyday problems than people who do not experience any physical limitations. Guess why? They're not bouncing back. Going to the gym doesn't help. Drinking herbal special tea doesn't help. I must take what the doctors have prescribed or else. And marijuana doesn't help. It helps with nausea. That's just one thing. Let's see after it's been legalized if it solves all of the medical problems and the hospitals empty out. I doubt it. I think the hospitals are going to be packed even more than ever. Lower levels of self-management are less, we're actively coping with consequences of our illness than people who do not have these problems. People who experience social problems have a lower level of symptom management and are also less active in coping with stress. The basic problem with being chronically ill is it's not a one-time stress-filled life event. It's not here today and gone tomorrow. And the body has no time to heal. When stress becomes a continuous process of balancing the demands of the illness and the demands of everyday life, a chronically ill person has no choice but to withdraw from life. In other words, having everyday problem is indeed a major factor in lowering the ability to self-manage chronic illness. People with chronic illness are more likely to experience everyday problems when they have physical limitations and when they perceive their health is poor, and when they run out of resources to combat and treat the many side effects of the illness, the collateral damage, as I said, of life extending medications. So an important question might be why a person with chronic illness is not able to accept the chronic illness and make the desired lifestyle changes. I know that's what everybody else is asking. People with chronic illness might have, for instance, a minor to major financial problem, not being able to go on a holiday, or living on a fixed income and struggling to get by each month. Despite these stress inducers, nothing is being done to lessen the severity of the problem that triggered the high levels of stress. The forgotten chronically ill in our society. Studies are needed to establish whether whether resources are needed to assist these chronically ill, needed to increase, or in other words, socialized medicine might need to reprioritize where the money is allocated, which problems to address given their limited resources, and that these priorities are presently influenced by who is expected to die first. And that's what it all comes down to. Being chronically ill is very disruptive to a person and their family's daily life. However, most people blame the sick person for not knowing instinctually how to manage their chronic illness. All on their own. Let's put it that way. It's all on my own. I've had to become a doctor. I have to know more than the doctors themselves. I have to manage 5 specialists all at the same time. The general practitioner doesn't have time to even see me, let alone manage 5 other specialists. Medical breakthroughs now prolong a person's life that only a few decades ago they would have died by natural cause. We as a society have ignored, forgotten, and at best, people with chronic illness that has been brought about by medical advancements. So on the one hand, we've got medical advancements. It's fantastic. But on the other hand, people are forced by these medical advancements to live out their life past their original due date and left to suffer alone. You know, it's sad to say the least. I'm not the only one. I see these people every time I go to my appointments, every time I go for treatment. It's sad watching these people being wheeled in. I see this one woman. Each time she comes, it's worse and worse. The first time I saw her, she walked in. The second time, she was wheeled in. The third time, she was literally carried in by somebody, carried in like a rag doll and put in the chair, and then they spent the next hour trying to get the needle in the vein. The pain and the suffering when your veins collapse from dehydration, they can't get the needle in to hydrate you. So whenever I bring up these subjects, these really brutal, honest subjects, it's not about suicide. It's about coping in a society that's moving forward at a phenomenal rate and leaving behind the sick, the chronically ill. The chronically ill are forced into self-management. They're struggling to live in a kind of forced exile, while the lion's share of the resources and understanding go to cancer patients, terminal or not. This is the question that some of us want to know why. Why is this? Just because we're not so-called terminal, we will die if we don't get our treatment. But because we're not terminally ill, as they classify it, to understand these difficulties that people who live with chronic illness and their caregivers, we've been forgotten. basically the caregivers of these people are the forgotten heroes in our society who work in total solitude and silence, who very rarely get any medical support or any financial, well, even support, emotional support. Anyways, if you have any questions that you want me to answer or work on, please let me know. Text me. This was sort of a self-indulgent vlog about my own illness. I'm not suicidal. I just want people to understand that some of us are out there struggling, and the things that are going on in the news don't matter. Once, if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. And that's what you don't want to find out. When you don't have your health, you don't have anything. So until the next time,